All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we have a session by the wonderful Kevin Patton and the wonderful Robert Christofferson happening here. First up is Kevin Patton. He'll be discussing the strategies to make your textbook workflow more efficient. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. As Maureen mentioned, this is a two-parter, so if you're not getting much out of this first part, that's okay. There's a second part, and Robert will be doing that. And what we're both doing, and we collaborated on this and sort of divided up the topics and so on. We're just going through sort of a hodgepodge of different things or different strategies that we've learned, or different concepts that we've run across that we really need to know as authors. And as Robert mentioned in this morning's talk, these are things that we wish we knew when we started, but have learned over the years. One other thing that I want to mention about this is that what I'm going to be doing is focusing on the day-to-day process of textbook authoring. And what I mean by that are like some practical things, such as your workspace, what size microscope you need to repair the watches, and so on. The idea of this is not to say, well, the way I do it is the right way, everybody should do that. Here's what I found works for me, and hopefully that'll spark ideas in the way you do things. Because some of the kind of files I work with may be different than the files you work with. Might be a different format or different software user, something like that, but hopefully there'll be some little thing in there you can say, well, no, I can't do it that way, but this gives me an idea for doing it another way. And we're all looking for efficiencies, right? Because as we know, it's a lot of work to produce a textbook, and if we can reduce the amount of time we're spending on the book and increasing the amount of time we're spending on other things, that improves our life, right? And so that's my goal. And here's some things I've found that have helped me get closer to that goal. I don't think I'll ever achieve it, but I'm getting closer. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the idea of a marked up copy. I didn't really think about that as a thing and as a specific intentional strategy when I first started working on textbooks, and it wasn't until I got to my first revision that, like, oh my gosh, I should have been keeping track of all this, and I kind of was, but it was in little bits and pieces and files and Post-it notes and stuff all over the place. And so now I have an intentional, what I call a marked up copy, as you can see by the sticker. Often it's a bound copy. It depends on which title it is. I have several different human anatomy physiology textbooks. And usually the smaller titles, the shorter titles, I should say, I just use the regular paper copy or the bound copy. But my larger book, it's a 2-semester book, it comes as an option as a binder-ready version. And so I use the binder-ready version, and you'll see some advantages to that in a minute. Before my publishers start making those available to any user, I would just take the bound copy to our campus print shop, and they have one of those big guillotine-type paper cutters, and they would just cut off the binding, and then they would run it through their 3-hole punch machine and could do it that way. I keep that marked up copy labeled because I often do have several copies of the same edition laying around, using it for different things, and I want to know which one is the official marked up copy. So as soon as I get that first copy from my editor, they usually send that ahead of the rest of them that I get contractually. That becomes my markup copy, that very first one, after I show it to everybody. And everybody says, oh yeah, okay, another edition, great, thanks, congratulations. Then I slap the sticker on, and now that's my official marked up copy, because many of you probably had this experience, right? You're flipping through, you're all excited to see the new edition, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I missed that. Got to mark that one. And so you go through and you start that marked up copy. The other thing I do that I found is very useful is to use little temporary tags, those sticky note tabs on there to mark where I've made those marks, so that as I'm going through the revision, they're easy to find. And then as I incorporate that change or decide, nah, that was a bad idea after all to make that change, then I get rid of that tab and it's gone. So I can kind of keep progress of, which things I've marked up. And which have already been incorporated. And I also found out the hard way that you shouldn't get in between the lines and make your mark in black ink there in between the lines and that, because even though your page is tabbed, you might spend a full minute trying to find, well, what change did I have on this page? So I used, a bold flare felt tip pen and a bright color and so on, and put it way out to the margin. So at a glance, I can tell where that mistake is. And I always use the traditional copy editing symbols. And the reason is that if you're using different kind of symbology, I found that as an undergraduate student in my notes. I'd use different symbols as a shorthand because, the lecture was going too fast and so on. And then I go back and think, well, what does that little plus sign mean? What is a star? I have stars all over the place. What is that? So, you can have your own system, but be consistent in that system. So when you go back 3 years later or a year and a half later or whenever it is, and you're trying to reinterpret those notes, you know what it is. Another thing that I've been starting to do, and I'm not sure if I'm going to like it or not, but I want to throw it out there as a possible way of doing this markup copy, and that is do it in the digital book, in the ebook. Now this one is Elsevier's Page Burst, it's Vital Source Bookshelf. And so when it comes up, one of the features of most digital books is that you can highlight sections and you can take notes on sections. Usually when you take a note, it automatically highlights it. And then you can keep a file of just all those highlights. And so as you go through, you do it just like a paper copy. You can go through when you're revising that chapter page by page in your digital version and see, where those different revisions are that you made, and you can make notes on them and so on. Like this, I just did this as a sample because I haven't done it to this book, but astrocytes, those of you that know your anatomy physiology, those are things where we're rapidly learning that they do a lot more than we thought they did, and so every edition I look again at the astrocytes and see if I need to update that. The other thing is about digital books that I probably use this a lot, and that is the search feature. So that if I go into a book or into one of these books and I'm going to be doing some revising, or even if I'm answering like a student question, I'll get a lot of questions from users from all over the place, and they'll say, on page 284 it says blah, 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 and there's a question at the end of the chapter, and it's not covered on page 284 where you cover this topic. And I'm thinking, I know I cover that topic. I just do a quick search of that term and find out, well, it was on page 286 is where, the aspect of that concept that this student was looking for. They just didn't look far enough. And that's just one example. I can use that, a new term. Terminology changes in my field all the time, probably in whatever field you're working in, and you want to update things. You want to make sure you found them all. This is one of the tools you could use. I'll talk about another one in a few minutes. And I also sometimes, when I'm doing a revision, and as I said, I have several different titles, and I want to borrow an image that we created for the last edition of one title, and I want to use that new image, or maybe it's an image that wasn't in this book at all, in any version, in the book I'm revising at the moment. So I want to quick add that to my art manuscript file. I can just do a copy and paste. As a matter of fact, this one has functionality where you click on the image and it will it'll copy, put it on your clipboard, and then you can paste that into your PDF file or your Word file or whatever it is you're using. So that would be another use of it. I used to take old books and cut out the picture and paste it on a piece of paper, or put it on the photocopier or whatever. So I have the whole library of my marked up books that I can grab at any time. And as I say, those are notes you're taking for your revision, or at least that's a usual reason to do that. And you want to start at your earliest opportunity. Like I said, as soon as I open the book, I usually find something that I can start with, and I just keep doing that every time I have an idea, every time I get feedback on something that can be improved or something that could be added or deleted or whatever. I also keep track of my reprint corrections. So if someone sends me a typo or a label line that's a little bit off or something like that, I do two things. I mark it in my marked up copy, so I have a record of it, and then I immediately send it to my editor, so when they do the reprint, and actually in the digital copy, they do those very frequently. They update those regularly, and so that the correction can be made right away in the current edition, but then I have a record of it when I'm doing the revision for the next edition. And you do want to double check that. I always mark which ones I've already sent in, but I'm always careful to check those again to make sure that whatever I'm working with, whatever file I'm working with, actually has that correction I had sent in. Usually they don't, in my experience, because they're sending me the file for the first printing, the original first printing, and that's what I'm working from. So all those changes that got made, not that there's a million of them or anything, but there's a handful, they're not going to be in there, and I have to go back in and redo them and make sure they're in there. Otherwise, the same mistake's going to pop up in your first printing of the next edition. And then I also make notes on planned changes. So any global changes, like here's something I want to add to every chapter. Here's a new feature I want to add to every chapter. I'll put that on the end papers. I keep a list on the end papers there, like maybe the brief contents or something like that. And I'll just keep a list going of things that I want to do just broadly. And then, of course, if I have a specific change for a specific topic within a certain chapter, then I obviously mark it up right there in that particular chapter, so where they occur. I also will attach notes and stuff. Like if I get an email from somebody who says, hey, I happen to do research in this particular area, and I read your coverage in your book here, and I think it's a little misleading. I think you need to clarify this based on current thinking in this field or whatever. And I don't usually, I'll look at it at that time and think about it. I'll, over time, do some research and so on. But when it comes down to brass tacks and I really need to make this revision, I'm going to want to have a copy of that original email so that I can go back and see specifically what those comments were and do some hard searching on that to see what is it that I want to do in my book in response to that. If there's a journal article or something like that that I know I definitely want to incorporate in some way in the book, I'll take the abstract and just put it right in. That's why I like the binder version, because I can just stick it in there. Now, I do keep research. We'll talk about the research papers in general and so on, research sources. I do keep those in a separate file because then my marked up copy would be like this. But if it's something I definitely know and there's like an abstract or something I can put right there to remind me of what I was thinking, then I'll put it in there in the marked up copy. Another thing I found useful is sometimes we'll get to the next edition and I find, wow, I got several different revisions going on at once. Ken was talking this morning about he had 3 revisions all at one time going on. And whenever I think things are getting tough, I'm going to think of Ken sitting there with his three revisions going on at one time. When I've gotten in tough spots like that, sometimes I'll ask a contributor to come in and do certain chapters or do the first pass at certain chapters and so on. And I want them to incorporate or at least look at the notes I've made in my marked up copy so I can send them those pages or copies of those pages. So it's a good way to give guidance to other people who are working on your project. Now, binder files, what I'm talking about here is, I think Adobe calls it that in their, like Acrobat, which you're using to maybe edit or review a PDF. They have something that they will make called a binder file, and I really, really like doing this. Now, you might think this is a disaster and don't want to do it, but it has really saved me a lot of time and a lot of mistakes. And what a binder file is when you take all of the chapters, because I don't know about you, but I get everything as separate chapters. I get chapter 1, chapter 2, they're all in separate files, and that's how they want them back, and that's okay, I can give it back to them that way. But when I'm editing or revising a book, I want the whole book there in one file. And I'll give you some reasons for that in a second, but these are really easy to make. You can ask your editor to do that for you, and they can have an editorial assistant go in and do it. But it's not that hard, so I just go ahead and do it myself. And in Word, you just go in and just click Add an object, add a text to the file, and you're done. And you just add chapter 1, and then when you're done with that, add chapter 2, and add chapter 3 and 4 and 5 and the glossary and all that stuff. Front matter, back matter, anything you want. And my art manuscript is I always do mine in Acrobat. That's how it's provided to me. The art from the previous edition is provided to me that way, but it's in chapters, separate chapters. So I just go in and make a binder file. I just combine files into a single PDF, and so I have all of them there. Now that can get a little dicey because depending on what the size those are and how many images you have, you need to have a lot of memory on your computer, a lot of working memory on your computer. Otherwise, it's too huge of a file for anything else to work, and things work slowly and so on. But I've not really run into any problems myself with that. Okay, so one of the big reasons I like to do it is the search and replace thing. So for example, loop of Henle, that's a little microscopic unit in your kidney that's part of the basic functional unit of the kidney. And, if I want to update that, loop of Henle is kind of an old traditional name. If I want to update that to the more modern usage where we're getting away from eponyms, and that is things named after people, and I want to call it the nephron loop, well, you would think, well, it's in the kidney chapter, right? It's part of the kidney. Nuh-uh, it's mentioned in a couple other places, and I don't want to miss them. So I don't want to introduce it to the student as the nephron loop, and then in a later chapter where we're talking about acid-base balance and the kidney's role in acid-base balance, all of a sudden, there's loop of Henle or something like that. And so this way it's going to find everything. But one caveat with doing the search and replace is don't choose the one replace all occurrences and do it automatically. You want to go find next, find next, find next, and make sure it's an example where you want to do it. Because you don't want a sentence that says the nephron loop, also known as the nephron loop, is, and that will do that if you had it replace all of them. And a good friend of mine, she wrote a little memoir of some adventure she had raising her kids, and her editor told her that she shouldn't use her kids' real names because she didn't get permission from her kids to tell these stories, which is a questionable choice to begin with, I think. But she did a search and replace of the kids' names. And then she didn't realize until after it was printed that in the middle she has a story about Jesus, Mary, and Jimmy. Because the story she told was based on a kid thinking he was part of the Christmas story because he had the same name as one of the characters. So anyway, you got to be careful. Okay, so so then if your publisher wants them back, your draft or the version you're sending back to your publisher, if they want them in a chapter by chapter thing, that's easy to do as well. You just go in and select the text of chapter 1 and copy it into, just create a new file and just copy it right in and name that chapter 1. And then you create another new blank file and copy in chapter 2 and chapter 3. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it only takes a couple of minutes. It really does. And once you get used to it, the first couple times you can be like, how do I do this? But after that, it's like riding a bike. You just do it without thinking. I suggest thinking, though. The other thing that I want to talk a little bit about are managing all those files. So you have all these chapter files of the original, I don't know what you call it, but we call it the downloads. That's the download from the previous edition. So those are the fresh ones of the previous edition. And then I have my first draft file. And then my developmental editor usually goes through and asks some questions and so on. So there's her version, and then I go through that and answer the queries or make suggested changes or whatever. Then it goes to production department, and the copy editor looks at it. So there's the copy edited version. So I might end up with like 8 different versions of a chapter of any one chapter by the time we're done. And so I need to be careful about how I name those chapters. So I want them to be very descriptive. Now my publisher sends them to me with C01, chapter 01, and then this string of digits, which it took me a while to figure out that's the ISBN number. So that makes sense for the publisher to keep their records that way, but I don't know, do you know your ISBN numbers? That's not handy, right? So when I was using paper files mostly for all those versions, I made sure of that, but then I would append things to the physical label and say, okay, this is the draft. This is first draft, like you see right here, first draft. Or, no, wait a minute. Yeah, over here, first draft. And then I'll have one for second draft, then I'll have one for copy edit, and then I'll have one for, whatever. So I can keep them straight, because at a glance they look the same. You can't tell by looking at them, which they are necessarily. So when you're doing digital files, and I hardly ever use any paper files anymore for either the art or the manuscript. Everything's digital in a Word file or a PDF file. And so I have my own little system, and you can make up your own little system that tells me the kinds of things I need to know for that particular file. I need to know what title it is, what edition it is, because like I said, I have several titles, and each one has multiple editions. I want to know which chapter it is, obviously, and this might seem like a minor point, but if you don't know that you're supposed to do this, I'm telling you now to save you some heartache. When you're putting chapter numbers, use multiple digits. Do 01, 02, 03. Don't put 1, 2, 3, because then when it gets sorted out in the directory, you're going to have chapter 1, chapter 11, chapter 12, 13, and then chapter 2, 21, 22, 20, and it's not good. And then I put which draft it is. So in this example, it's draft 1, obviously. Or I could put draft 2 or whatever, or I could put download or original or something like that if I want to keep it, as an archive. Like, well, okay, I made these changes, but what was in the original again? I can go back and look at that. And then I put my initials at the end, KP for Kevin Patton. And then, as the process goes on, I can append additional information to the file titles. So my developmental editor right now is Karen C. Turner, and she uses those initials, KCT, and she capitalizes them. So I know at a glance when I see capital KCT, and I always use lowercase for mine. So excuse me, at a glance, I can tell, okay, that's Karen's version. So that's the version where Karen has gone in and asked me a couple of questions that I need to answer, maybe already have answered. Well, no, I wouldn't have answered them. Once I answer them, then I save that as a next file where I put KP on the end again. So this is my draft that was sent to Karen, and she sent it back, and now I've created a new file out of that because I've answered her questions or made the changes she suggested. I have a blog called thetextbookauthor.org. It's on the top of the handout that you got. And it's one of the articles I have in there is a review of this software that I've been using for years and years. It's a very simple software. When it first opens up, it looks like the cockpit of a jet airplane or something, and like, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to drive this thing. But it really is misleading, and because it's very simple to use. And you can go in there, and what I do is when I take those downloaded versions, I go in and first of all change the names of the files. So it takes out the ISBN number and adds in the little appendage, download or original or whatever. And so I have that. I save that in one directory. Then I copy those all over to a new directory. And now I go in, and what this will do is it'll allow you to, okay, remove these letters from each file name and add these letters to each file name. And it does all of them. So in my big book, I have 48 chapters, plus front matter, end matter, glossary, appendices, and things like that. So I have a lot of files, and I can just do them like in a minute and a half. They're all renamed. So I strongly recommend you take a look at that, and it's free. So that's another thing to be said for it. I also recommend using some cloud-based file storage. So if your house ever floods or burns down, I live at the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi River. Floods happen. I'm on pretty high ground, but you just never know. And we learned about climate change today, right? So, anyway, I use Dropbox a lot, and the good thing about Dropbox is that You can share, I share it with my editor and so on. And we'll be talking more about that aspect of things in a few minutes. But it's just an example of one of the folders in my Dropbox that I'm using right now. So well, that's me. So I'm one of the users. KT is Karen Turner, my developmental editor. Rhonda, whose name you'll see in a few minutes here, she's a contributor that's helping with certain features in all the chapters and so on. And Karen just left my publisher and is now working on my book as a freelancer. So she had to use 2 different emails to register, and that's why she's in there twice. But anyway, you can see that there's these different directories. So here's stuff from Kevin for other people to pick up. Here's stuff from my contributor, Rhonda, where I can go in and look at what she's doing. Here's stuff that's coming in from external reviewers at various stages. And there's where the different art files are going, the original art draft, the new art sketches, things like that. So the good thing about using Dropbox or iCloud or any of these other kind of virtual disks that are out there on some hard drive somewhere, but not at your own physical location, is that you can access them anywhere you go. So I can get to any of those files from right here if I need to. I'm not doing anything like that here. I'm learning stuff. But, if there was some emergency, my editor called and you have to look at this really quick. I could do that if I wanted. You can share folders, as I said, and there's less chance of losing files. And you're looking at someone who used to store all his files on a portable hard disk, and I would take it to my campus, and I'd take it back home, and I had all kinds of different, I had my school work on it as well as my writing stuff, and I'd back it up regularly. And you know what? One time I forgot to back it up, and then I forgot again. And I had several months where I thought I had backed it up, but I didn't. And then I'm packing up my bag. I think it might have even been this bag. I'm packing up the bag, and it drops from this height onto a carpeted floor. And I'm thinking, oh, that's no problem. It's got a rubber box around it. This is a big problem. I sent it to one of those places that guarantee that, it can be run over by a tank and we'll fix it. Nope, sorry, yours we can't fix. So I lost some stuff that I obviously I'm still alive, so I survived without it, but barely. So less chance because they have a lot of redundancies in how they back things up. There was a question here. Hold on, do you want to use the microphone for the question or? You get to, stereo, okay, 2 microphones.
So you maintain all of your working files and directories that you were just describing to us, you maintain all of those on Dropbox?
No, I don't. And that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. I do have files where all of that stuff is there. But I had this scary experience, so I keep them on a hard disk at home too, and I back that up. I have a program that backs it up every 2 hours. So there must be 1 million copies of everything I do out there somewhere. So, but that's a good question. I do also have it on my hard disk. Well, I do keep a backup of my stuff, but I also when I'm finished with a draft, that's where it goes. And so but I keep them all on there so that I can go back if I have to older versions of it. But you can use it a lot of people use it as their sole place to keep it. And because the service is backing it up for you, you have that. Now, the downside of it is if your internet goes out and you really want access to those files. So that's one of the other reasons why I keep it on my hard disk. Another thing, a recommendation I have, a little practical, helpful hint, is having a snippet file. This is a file of things that you use frequently. So here's just a few of the little snippets I have in the snippet file I used most recently, where you'll go through either the art draft or the manuscript draft, and there'll be queries from the copy editor. And a lot of the copy editor queries will be, I changed this per our agreed style, okay? Yeah, okay, and then there'll be 12 of those in every chapter. Okay, I changed it. I'm glad they're asking me to confirm that, but it's the same answer over and over. And it's way easier if I just copy OK and then just hit I have on my pointing device a little thing that pastes automatically with one click. So I paste, 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 paste everywhere I get there. And when you take 48 chapters times 12 OKs, that actually saves some time. So, and for another thing we have and actually I think the book is over here, isn't it? Yeah, the black book with the funky abstract brain on it there, fourth book from the right, fourth book from the left, excuse me. If you look at that book, when you open it up, there's what we call the clear view of the human body, and it's transparency overlays where you like peel off the skin. I hope this doesn't gross you out. Peel off the skin, and then peel away the muscles, and then peel away the bones, and then we get to the internal organs, and so on. And it had never occurred to me before that maybe I ought to reference that when we get to a certain system of the body or a certain organ, to remind the reader that, hey, don't forget the clear view. You're going to get a different perspective than you can with the diagrams that we have here. So I spent a day going through my entire master binder file and just going from chapter to chapter and putting this phrasing in wherever it applied. And of course I had to make some changes and, kind of oriented to the specific context where it landed, but having that snippet there and just be able to copy it in worked okay. Now you might think, well, why not just type it in the first time, copy that, and then keep going? Why put it in a snippet file? Because in between time I'm going to be finding something else I need to copy and paste. And now I have to go back and find, well, when's the last time I used that? But if I just stick it in a snippet file, it's always there. And then what about my next book? In my next book, maybe I want to add that there because it has a clear view also. And so there it is, it already exists. So those kinds of things. Now the research file, that's what I was talking about a little while ago when you're, I would recommend always thinking about your next edition. I'm thinking about the next edition while I'm revising that edition. So I'm not even done with this one and I'm already thinking about what am I going to do in the next edition. And so I'm always collecting information, in the topics that I cover in the book. And I still keep a paper file, and a lot of my research goes into there. And I do it by topic. You can also do it by chapter. But with my books, they're all pretty much they're all human anatomy, physiology, and they're all about the entire body. But one of them will have 25 chapters, one of them will have 22 chapters, one of them will have 48 chapters, so it's divided up differently. So if I do it by chapter number, that's kind of, how am I going to do that? Because I don't want to have a different research file for every book I have, because it all covers the same topic, just at a different depth. And so that's why I do mine by topic rather than by chapter. And also notice that I have archive folders. So when I do a revision and I get that content, dealt with, like, okay, this research, this is really interesting, but it really is like way beyond the scope of what I need to put in the textbook. So then that goes in the archive. So I still have it, but I've already processed it. I've already made a decision about it. Okay, this one here, yeah, this is going to require a little bit of change to the text or the art in my book, so I'm going to make that change. I've made that change. I've already dealt with this one. That goes in the archive. So the only thing that's in the one that's not archived are things that are new that I have not yet dealt with directly. So another little system. I also have begun using digital files for research, and it's way easier, but I was born in the middle of the last century, so it takes a while to get used to this stuff. So I'm trying, and so you can save, instead of having physical file folders, you can save that in the cloud too, in Dropbox or iCloud or Google Drive or any one of these things, most of which have some level of free service, but then if you want extra storage space, you have to pay for it. I also have been trying out, I still haven't found the ideal solution yet, but there are different clipping or bookmarking services that you can use. There's OneNote, Evernote, Digo. OneNote, we had a webinar, it's mentioned in your handout there not long ago in TAA that kind of walks you through the process of using OneNote and how that might be beneficial. So you can look that up. Another one, and I've been using this a lot, I've been using Mendeley a lot. They're owned by my publisher, so it makes it really handy. I often use the database for journal articles that is also owned by my publisher, and Mendeley is built into that as well. But you can also use it for anything. Anything you find in a web browser, you can save it with these services, and you can attach annotations to it. You can put keywords so that later on you can find anything that has to do with loop of Henle or nephron loop or kidney or whatever, because you put tags in there. And depending on the publisher of that journal article, they will probably have already pre-populated much of that for you. They will already have keywords. They might have an abstract or a summary of the abstract, which is kind of weird to summarize an abstract, but they'll do it. And all the bibliographic data is in there as well. So in terms of author, journal, volume, all that stuff. Another kind of thing that I have found to be very useful is workflow charting. And what this is to create a table. And there are two examples that I gave you. And this is confidential work product, so don't republish it. Like you'd even be able to figure out what half of it is. But it's just an example of how I do it. Now you might look at that and say, well, no, I would do it landscape, not portrait. And I would do this, do it this way, not that way. And I'd have these columns, not those. So what I do is I do it in Word because I'm more comfortable in Word than I am in Excel. And so it's easier for me to format the tables the way I want them. And so each row is a chapter. And then the columns across the top, those are the different tasks that you need to do during the revision process. And so this is comparing it to a similar title that I just revised. So I have a lot of updates in there. So I'm going to go in there and see, well, where can I take those improvements that I made in the previous title and import them into this title? Because I don't want to just start from scratch and forget some of those things. So that's my first step, is go back and see what I need to bring over from that one's called Structure and Function of the Body. This one's from Human Body and Health and Disease. So then I go through all the reviews, and once all the reviews of the first draft are processed, I check it off. So I'm done with that. And I like this just because it shows progress. I mean, there's now a fancy word for this, gamification. It's like earning a medallion or whatever, it's like, put a little smiley face if you want, but check marks make me happy. That means something's done, and when a column is full, it's like, whew, that part's done. And you'll see another aspect of that in a second. But, all the different stages that you have in your process, and yours are going to be different than mine. Mine change all the time as I'm finding new and better ways to do things. You do want to leave some blank columns. I usually leave some blank columns like in between groupings too, because there's always some stage you're like, oh shoot, I should be checking that off so I don't forget a chapter that I need to do that. And so if you leave blanks in between, then that gives you the flexibility to do that. So I check off the tasks as they're done. You'll notice that some are highlighted, and those are things that need to be submitted. And so as soon as they're submitted, I'll highlight it, and then when I submit that one, I'll highlight it. So I'll have a column that has some unhighlighted parts, but they're checked off. That means I did them, I just haven't submitted them yet, because I usually submit things in batches. And then I keep them in a folder. Like this one here you'll see is clipped to the outside of the folder. So that's the one that would be the working copy for that edition. But then inside that folder, I have all these other ones from past editions and maybe some other related documents. And I can go back and see a history of that. And you might think, well, why would you ever have to do that? Well, I was just working on trying to negotiate better terms for a revised contract. And there was some argument some discussion, some professional discussion about royalties. And to make my case, I wanted to point out historically how many chapters I had worked on versus my now retired co-author, and how that processed work, like what the trailing off of the number of chapters he was working on and the increasing number of chapters I was on, and they didn't really have a record of that. But I did. I just pulled these out and I showed them, okay, here's who worked on what chapter, in which edition, and I could document that and show that. And things turned out pretty well for me in my negotiations, by the way. It's signed, and I don't know how much that had to do with it, but it couldn't have hurt. And it's kind of fun just going back too and seeing, how you did things and so on. Now, this one's also in your handout. You might wonder why all the weird colorization. Well, I did this is pretty major revision in terms of the structure of the book. These chapters here that are highlighted in pairs, those are split chapters. I divided up the longer chapters into smaller chapters. So that was showing me and my editors where those splits were. These yellow highlighted ones, those are the ones that got a new chapter name. Often when I did a split, I also had to kind of reconsider the chapter title naming. And then some of them you'll notice that kind of last minute we decided to change the name of a chapter there too. So, and you can also highlight them according to whose chapter they are. When I was working with a co-author, it was always I was one color, he was the other color, and we could at a glance tell whose chapters was who. Uh-oh, went too far. There are ways of doing this online with software. I'm not familiar with those, but I know they exist, so I just want to throw that out there if you're more prone to using digital solutions for things. And, we already talked about I'm going backwards. That's why. I'm like, do I have that slide again? And what was I thinking? Software options. Oh, and my publisher has their own system for kind of doing this, at least in terms of submitting documents. It's not going to check off the parts that you're doing before you do the submission, but they have a system for, okay, you've submitted your first draft, now the copy edited draft is available, now you've submitted your copy edited draft with all your comments on it and so on. And I haven't used their system yet, but they have it available when I'm ready for that. Another thing, real quick, I need to wrap it up in a second here, but multiple monitors, and you're going to think this is crazy. There's no reason I need multiple monitors, but I can never go back. That's why I don't want to do work here, because I only have one monitor to work with. And it's like, oh gosh, I can't do that. It's like might as well do it on my iPhone. And so this is a 3-monitor system. I'm using 4 now. You'll see a picture of that in a second. But it means you can open all these windows and they can actually be open. You don't have to close one, then open another one, close one, open another one. So I can be adding things to the glossary while I'm working on the end of chapter material, while I'm, all at the same time. And so it's a lot less likely I'm going to skip something. So this is a screen capture of all 4 monitors, just the desktop. And I use a piece of software called Fences, or Fences for Windows. And so this is just one part of that screen. And you can see, you can take all your little icons. Now these are all folders, file folders, that are showing the folders within the folders plus the files that are in the main folder. And I can just click on they're ready to go. I don't have to open up File Explorer and find them and all that. So, in the morning when I'm doing my schoolwork, I can open this one up and get all the files I need. When I'm working on health and disease, which I'm working on now, I can get to that one. There's all my book files, ELS for Elsevier. I was starting to work on this workshop this morning, so that was there. And you can change these and move them around, and it doesn't change where they are on the file. It's just where they are on the desktop. You can also drag things in, make an empty fence or corral or whatever they call it, and drag things in. And then one last thing. I know can I take 2 more minutes? Okay. The standing desk. I really strongly recommend this. I've been doing this for about a year, and it takes a little while before your body gets used to it. You will feel really, really tired. Not just really, really tired, but really, really, really tired at the end of the day until your muscles and your brain kind of figures out how to position your body and so on. But I find I feel better while I'm working doing that. And there's different kinds of stand-up desks. Some of them, you can just set something on top there. My editor's been trying this, and she's been using my book. She piles them up and sets her monitor on top of it. And so they're good for something. And there's some that are just dedicated stand-up desks, some that are portable up and down. This is the kind I use. And it's counterweighted so that I can just click the ends. There's like a little locking mechanism. Just click the ends, and it lowers down to where I could sit or raise it up. But I never sit. I found that I like standing so much. Sometimes I'll sit, but I just get a high chair and sit on that. But it's really easy to lower it down too. It's in the, I think it's in the thing, isn't it? It's Veridesk, I think is the name of it. And so there's a picture of me with, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 monitors. And one of the things I like about it is that I'm always like, oh yeah, I need to get my marked up copy from over here, and I have something filed over here, and oh, the phone's ringing, and is that the dog barking again? What is he barking at? And so I can just, when you're standing up, you can make those moves rather than, oh gosh, I got to get up again, and it just improves my workflow, and there's a lot of health benefits too. And the last thing I'm just going to mention briefly, and that is ergonomics. A friend of mine who also writes an A&P textbook, she had a really bad problem with her neck. It was in this position, she couldn't move it. When I saw her a couple of years ago at a conference, and she couldn't move it because she had been typing like this, working on her book. And so you really need to think about that. I was getting real bad pains here in my wrist. I thought it was carpal tunnel syndrome or something. It wasn't. It was my pointing device. It was the way I was pushing on my pointing device. And so what I use now is this. It's called a roller bar. Or roller mouse. It's in the handout. And I love this thing. It takes a little while to get used to, but it is so great. This thing here, it spins around like the roller on a baking rolling pin. And so it slides back and forth on this bar. It slides back and forth and goes this way. And you don't even have to take your hands away from the keyboard to do it. And I love it. And my wrist has stopped hurting. And the last thing is take 10. I'm not going to take up any more of Robert's time here, but it's really important to take some time to take a break regularly. That's been mentioned in other talks, both online and at past conferences and so on. But get up every 10 minutes. There are timers you can get, apps you can get that'll, nudge you, every 50 minutes to get up and for 10 minutes or so. I do Tai Chi. I love doing that because I can do that right there in front of my oh yeah, I'm doing it here. Do it right in front of my, and that's what she's doing there too. But you can do yoga. You can, run in place, lift weights, do whatever. Just go take a walk. Go out to the garden and see what fruits the birds have eaten and robbed you of. Okay, that's all I have. And so Robert is going to take over now. And while he's getting set up,
Thank you, Kevin. And I do want to mention that Kevin's book, Anatomy and Physiology, won a 2016 textbook award. So it is on display over here.
and if anybody
So
has
you can check it out. So
yeah, if you have a quick question while Robert's setting up,
yeah, I was going to
I
do
can
that. So.
Yeah.
All right, I think.
Oh, yep.
What kind of computer do you have? PC, Apple? Just
I have a
curious.
PC.
And can you talk about the working memory? I'm curious.
Talk about.
About the working memory, can you give me
Oh
some
gosh, no, I can't give you the
specifics?
number for that. What I do is look. What I do is look around in the PC magazines and see like what the gamers are using, and whatever the gamers are using, that's what I want to use. And the reason is not only because I have really huge files, but more and more publishers are using animations and different kinds of things like that. And so I want to be able to run the animations while I'm looking at the book, comparing the content, and doing all of that stuff. So I always kind of max it out. And so when you look in those PC magazines, magazines for enthusiasts, there'll be companies that sell reasonably priced, really high memory systems. And when you deal with a small company like that, and I'm not going to mention any big companies, but you know the big brand names, when you call, they're not going to treat you like a valued customer necessarily. But when you're calling this little outfit in Seattle that builds systems for gamers, they're going to treat you like a special person, and they're going to make good recommendations for, like, oh no, you don't need this, you need this, and tell them what you're doing. And I found that they're really intrigued that an author is calling them and not somebody who wants it for their Xbox system. But anyway, there was another question, yeah.
What was your setup for arranging your 4 monitors? It looked like you had some kind of a stand that kept all your monitors like.
Yeah,
in a
it
row,
looks
or-
like that, but it's not. It's just the little platform that comes with the monitor, and they're just set end to end on top of that portable desk. And I made sure I got one wide enough, and they just barely fit, but they do. And by the way, it's really easy to do multiple monitors. If you have a regular desktop system, it probably has a ports for 2 monitors at least already. All you got to do is get the other monitor, plug it in the back, and then a little window will pop up in Windows saying, do you want to use that other monitor? And then click yes, and it walks you through a wizard, and it'll take care of it. If you want to use more than 2 monitors, you need to get a graphics card, and that might freak you out, but you take it to whoever you take it to, and they'll put it in for you, the electronics store, and they'll put it in for you, and then you can plug 2 more monitors in. And that's all it is, nothing special. It's really easy.